With all of the rules, regulations, and seemingly taking of property rights by local and state governments, some people think that landlords don't have the same property rights as the rest of the citizens. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it has to do with property rights, and specifically our property rights that are guaranteed to us by the U.S. Constitution. So I was reading through this article, and this author was like, hey, you know what, with all the stuff that happened during the pandemic, with eviction moratoriums, with all these ridiculous rent control laws, it seems like our property rights are under attack, and specifically the property rights of landlords. Okay, they feel like, hey, they can willy-nilly take our right to exclude people from our properties away from us. And you know what? When you look at things that way, I completely agree, okay? There are so many issues, constitutional issues, that have come up recently, within the last few years that, it feels like we are moving to a society where they want the government to control housing. Okay, they want the government basically to socialize the housing system. That's what I am seeing. And I am in 100% disagreement with it, okay? Rent control laws, artificial price controls, telling you who you can and can't evict, who you have to rent your property to. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And, not only are they taking away your rights as a property owner, but they're also discouraging you from wanting to rent your property in the first place. So when they talk about, hey, we've got a shortage of housing, we've got a shortage of rental housing, there's nowhere for these people to live. Well, guess what? You are doing it. You are doing it with these stupid laws. There has to be some kind of incentive or motivation for people and companies and businesses to want to rent rental properties out, to want to build new rental properties. And if you take that away, well, you know what you end up with? Stagnation. Stagnation in terms of, hey, we have a limited amount of housing supply, and they're not getting more. We're not getting more at all. When I look at places like Australia and Canada, right, and their housing costs have skyrocketed, just gone through the roof in the last few years. And the reason, at least from what I've gathered, is that they have so many laws that control the system that basically it's limited the number of people and the number of new units that are being built. The number of people who want to rent out their properties is being limited as well. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you think our property rights are under attack? Okay, specifically the property rights of landlords. And I do. Okay, I really do. I told you what I thought was an unconstitutional taking of private property for public use without just compensation. Okay, that's what I thought the eviction moratoriums were. And, like violations of the contract clause in the Constitution, violations of, like different provisions of the Constitution. And you know what? I've had enough. I'm sick of it. I'm absolutely sick of it. But anyway, I want to tell you what this author thinks of the whole situation, because, they can speak much more eloquently than I can. So let's get into it. This article is coming from the Federalist Society, and it says, do landlords enjoy the same property rights as the rest of us? Okay, let's see what Mr. Ethan Blevins thinks. During the pandemic, cities, states, and the federal government rushed to stop landlords from evicting tenants, even for non-payment of rent. These efforts varied in severity, with some, like Washington State, barring evictions under almost all circumstances for well over a year. The many legal challenges to these evictions bans mostly fell flat. Last month, the Supreme Court declined to hear one such case challenging the Washington State eviction ban as an unconstitutional taking. With the pandemic behind us, the Supreme Court may have thought the issue was water under the bridge, but the regulatory appetite for restricting evictions is only growing, and bad precedent from COVID-era eviction bans will continue to insulate overzealous regulators from constitutional challenges until the Supreme Court takes up the issue. I was pissed when I heard that the Supreme Court wasn't going to look at this issue, okay? I was pissed because I said, if these people ever want to do this again, there is no court, precedent that says, hey, this is wrong, you can't do this. And so we basically will have to start all over again from scratch. I can see it happening too. I can see them saying, oh, well, you know what? Landlords can't evict people because of climate change or, whatever the reason is, right? They could come up with any number of excuses, whatever the next pandemic is. There's going to be another eventually, okay? I was around for the bird flu. I was around for the swine flu, and I was around for COVID. Lots of pandemics, people get sick. But if every single pandemic going forward ends up like this, where they're shutting businesses down, where they're telling landlords they can't evict people, then we will fall into the same issues we did with the last one, okay? And I don't want to see that happen. I want the courts to say, hey, you have a right to at least try to keep your business up. We're not going to force you out of business. The government forcing you out of business. The government's supposed to work for the people, isn't it? Yet they were working against the people. What does that mean? Anyway, let me continue. Laws restricting landlords' control over their property have sprung up across the country in recent years. In Seattle, for example, landlords must survive a regulatory labyrinth simply to oust a tenant who fails to pay rent. The city bars eviction during the winter, December through March, and for parents of school-age children and school district employees, it bars eviction during the school year. During the rest of the year, landlords still must demonstrate to the city's satisfaction that they have a just cause for evicting a tenant, a regulatory requirement now spreading around the country. More and more cities and states are not only stripping landlords of the right to evict, they are also stripping them of the right to choose their tenants at the outset. Many governments are adopting regulations that forbid landlords from denying tenancy to someone because of their criminal background, for instance. Seattle has adopted an ordinance that requires landlords to let tenants invite their pick of roommates or family members to reside at the rental property, whether the landlord likes it or not. Another Seattle original, called the First in Time Ordinance, requires landlords to rent to the first person who applies for a unit, so long as they check out on paper. Yeah, so we're seeing these laws being passed, okay? The first in time thing, like where you have to literally take the first person in line, like the first applicant who applies for your unit who is qualified. You don't get to pick and choose. I remember one of the properties I had like 10 overly qualified people who applied for living in my house, okay? Now imagine I'm going through these applications and I'm going, okay, who has the best credit score out of these 10? Who has the best rental record out of these 10? Who has the highest income out of these 10? Who has the longest job history out of these 10? Those are the things I was looking at, okay? Who has the best credit out of these 10? And that was the person I chose. I didn't just say, okay, well, this person met the bare minimum requirements, this person just makes 3x of the monthly rent. Meanwhile, the person over here made 10x the monthly rent. And no, I'm going to choose the one who makes 10x, because the person who makes 3x the monthly rent, yeah, you meet the requirements, but you're more likely to not pay me or not pay me on time than the person who makes 10x. It's just the fact. Everyone knows this. So that's why the landlord should be in charge of deciding who lives in their property. These laws squeeze landlords at both ends. They limit landlord control over who comes and whether they go. In short, they infringe upon the constitutional right, which the Supreme Court has repeatedly referred to as the cornerstone of private property, the right to exclude others. As the High Court put it recently, the right to exclude is one of the most essential sticks in the bundle of rights that are commonly characterized as property. In fact, this stick in the property bundle is so fundamental that it is the only stick that governments cannot take away without causing a per se taking that requires compensation, unless you are a landlord. And that's exactly why I say, this is an unconstitutional taking, okay? Because as a landlord, you lose that right apparently. Okay, it makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to anyone. But I can't figure it out. And what I want is, like I said before, I want the Supreme Court to make a definitive decision on this stuff. Okay, I want them to decide. I don't want them to pass the buck on to the appeals courts or to a lower, dismiss it or force the lower courts to make a decision, because there are so many activists in the lower courts. There's activists on the Supreme Court too, but I have more confidence that the total issue will be looked at the Supreme Court level, okay? And because it is such an important issue throughout the entire country, because I could literally imagine, let's say that things don't go my way and property rights are slowly eroded to the point where the entire country, from sea to shining sea, right, suddenly has the same property rights as like San Francisco, California, where everybody's under rent control. There's extremely hard to evict anybody. Like, and I'm talking about, you know, I'd be sitting in Nebraska and I have to deal with this nonsense, right? Well, I don't want it to be at that point and then they're like, well, maybe we should take a look at rent control now. No, we should definitely decide right now, before it's too late, whether these things are constitutional or not. Whether, you know, before they have another pandemic, decide whether eviction moratoriums are constitutional or not. It would be pretty easy and a pretty smart thing to do. And there are court cases that are asking these questions. So anyway, I'm going to put a link to this article in the description down below and let me know what you think, okay? Are our property rights, are they being eroded? Are we being, basically are unconstitutional laws, rules, and regulations being imposed upon us?